Hi, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Beth, and this is Mary, and we're a part of the team at Writing Magazine and Writers Online. Hi, Mary, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm very excited about our guest this week. Alex Davis is an author, creative writer, and media lecturer, writing workshopper, and events coordinator. He's taught extensively across genre fiction, often with a particular focus on horror, and is a regular monthly contributor to Writing Magazine, discussing aspects of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror fiction in our Fantasy Realms articles, which I have the pleasure of designing each month, and they're a lot of fun.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you on. Where are we speaking to you from today?
I'm just at home today. I don't really have kind of an office per se, so I tend to sort of sit in my front room and just chip away at everything. I find sort of fairly often I'm flitting around from one university to another, but for today, just hold up nice and warm and cozy against the cold. So yeah, that's it for today.
And what does a typical working day look like for you? It must be tricky balancing all of your different roles that you've got going on.
Yeah, as Mary said, yes, there's a fair few. I don't think there really is a typical working day. Like, every day is just kind of it all depends what's kind of most pressing on the horizon, what needs doing the most. I have a constantly very long to-do list, but I don't find that kind of intimidating. It's just I just want to have it on paper so I know what I have to do. And some of those things will be I can just 10 seconds mini task, I can tick that off. Certain things are going to take a bit longer. But yeah, some days it will be more kind of events focused and sort of the marketing side of things, the logistics. Some days it will be getting things ready for lectures and teaching. Some days it's more about writing articles, non-fiction, fiction. Yeah, very varied indeed. It's one of the things that I love about what I do is just these that no 2 days are quite alike. I think I have done, jobs before where days were broadly similar, and I found like as soon as I could get out of that, I felt a lot happier. But yeah, what I have at the minute, I'm watching a lot of films at the minute, which is quite nice. But putting some film festivals together, and part of the role as I speak is watching a lot of horror films. So that's quite a nice way to spend a working day as well, of course.
Yeah, that's a great way to spend your day. How do you like change like from wearing all of those hats? Do you have anything that kind of works to get you out of one sort of area into another?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I mean, for me, what I will try as far as I can, if it's university related, if it's teaching related, I will try and go to university. So then there's a real like headspace of kind of that's where I am. I'm in this kind of venue, this space today. That's what I should be doing. I have a lot of meetings, which just kind of helps me kind of keep sort of things separated out to a point. I think it's one of those freelance kind of skill sets, I suppose. I think it's very tough if you work a 9 to 5, like doing freelance is something else entirely because you are never quite sure what the next job is. That can be really exciting. That can be sort of thrilling. It can be waiting around slightly nervously. What is the next job going to be? And hopefully something will arrive. It definitely requires a sort of flexibility, I think, because I find I end up working a lot of what you would call unfavorable hours, I think is the term in this. So again, my job is definitely not 9 to 5. It will be, it could easily be kind of depending on what's going on, 8 till 8, or it can be I'm working the weekend. And so yeah, getting used to that sort of flexibility, I think is one of the most important things. And again, long lists. If it needs doing, it's on there somewhere. It'll be on page 1 or page 2 of the to-do list or page 3 sometimes. But that's my way of keeping track of it. If it's not on that list, it may as well not exist, which is yeah, that's just the way I have to manage it.
I'm exactly the same. I love a list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of writers do, definitely.
What is it about genre fiction that excites you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and it got me thinking back to sort of where I started. So as a teenager, I was sort of a big, voracious reader of, I suppose, what you would call like the genre classics. So at that point, I was kicking off with I was reading quite a lot of science fiction. So I was going to Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. Fantasy, I was massive into Michael Moorcock more than any other writer. I had virtually a full collection of his books before Amazon, before online shopping. So I had to do that the hard way, trawling boot sales, secondhand bookshops, horror I came to, I was thinking like via James Herbert. James Herbert was my starting point. And I remember like the moment I picked up a copy of The Rats because I was at a boot sale. My nan and granddad would take me to a boot sale every Sunday. And I'd go with my pocket money and just looking for books to buy. And I saw about three or four copies of this book, and I thought if I see one more, that's got to be a sign. And I was like two stalls along, I was like, oh, there's another copy of The Rats, that's got to be a sign. So I started with James Herbert, then got into kind of Stephen King, Clive Barker, and kind of again the horror classics kind of on the back of that. I was a massive Edgar Allan Poe fan, still am. My creative writing lecturer at university would tell me to lay off the Poe. I would hand a bit of work in, it would be so overblown and gothic and sort of over the top, like lay off the Poe, read something else for a bit. I think for me, I love the variety and the range. I think you can literally do anything in genre fiction. Like there are no limits. You are not restricted to what you see in the world around you. You want to create a whole another planet, go for it. You want to create a whole another world, go for it. You want to inject something into the real world as we know it, then go for it. There's nothing that's off limits. I think that gives you a genre that is so broad. And I think horror, I've always argued this point, horror is such a broad church. And you've got everything from your kind of very subtle kind of ghost stories and your folk horror that's a bit more about sort of suggestion and sort of, hints of what's there, all the way through to kind of body horror and, kind of the serial killers and slashers. And I think it's just that to me, it's just wonderful. There's so many ways you can take horror. And I think especially for horror, you can say so much. I often make this point, people sort of sometimes critics of genre fiction, who I should remain unnamed, but we'll sort of think, oh, it's escapism. I get this, like, oh, it's just very escapist, isn't it? I think, well, not if you read it, you find it's not really escapist. I'm not sort of looking to hide in a fantasy world, but I think you can, by looking at something indirectly, say an awful lot about it.
Mm.
I think sometimes we find it hard to address things in the real world in a very real world way, but we can use a fantasy world, a horror sort of creature as a kind of metaphor, as a way to look at it that feels more comfortable and feels more sort of natural to us. So I think that to me is what really speaks to me about genre fiction. That's always been my wheelhouse for for reading and writing alike. And yes, do not let me evangelize too much because I will do that if you give me a window. But that's my short answer on what gets me going about genre fiction.
Great answer. Very thorough. And what do you enjoy about being a creative writing tutor? How did you get
Yeah,
into
yeah. I mean, for me, I can remember the moment distinctly because I was sat at one of my local venues, Quad here in Derby. Still do a lot of work with them. Worked with them a number of times over the years, and sat with their programmer. We were discussing a couple of possibilities, and he said to me, "Oh, would you like to run a writing course?" And I went, "Yeah, great, yeah, yeah." And anyone who's freelance will probably have had this moment. There'll be some time you said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, great," and you think, why did I say that? You sort of have this moment of like, am I really going to do that? I mean, and you sort of like, I have to because I've committed to it. I sort of feel like I should see this thing through. Um, and I sort of started putting together what was an 8 week in-person writing course, and I got. And again, like the imposter syndrome was off the chart in that first session. I stood there like, am I going to talk to a bunch of people about how to write? Quite terrifying that first time. But I really enjoyed that first instant. I literally, this week, literally, I was in touch with someone who came to that very first ever writing course here in Derby, and they have a crime novel coming out this year, and it's like it's getting a really big release and a really big push. It's really exciting to see those kind of things happen. I think that is like the perfect example of one of the things that I do love, which is just seeing people succeed. It's lovely kind of, and again, not to like claim credit and you think that's all me, but you think actually you've had a small hand in someone achieving something in writing. And that can be, someone emailed me just this week, equally, they'd won a short story competition. Like, brilliant, massive congratulations, awesome. People who've gone on to write novels, people who've gone on to do their own teaching. I think it's just feeling like you're kind of giving something back to the writing community, and sort of people are, where you can reflect on people who've sort of helped you over the years. Nice that well, actually you've sort of given, sort of reciprocated that in some way, and that sort of next generation of aspiring writers, tutors, poets, storytellers are kind of, you're helping them along the way. I also just love the kind of the energy in the room, I guess, whether that's a virtual room or a real room. Um, the responses you get, you could do the same workshop 10 times, you never get the same response, you never get the same answers. People take your writing task in all kinds of directions. That's one of the things that I really love is the sort of just the positive energy about it, and people are making something. I think that to me is really thrilling as well. Yeah, it's just a place that always, I think, since I started, always felt quite kind of I felt quite at home, felt quite natural teaching in all sorts of ways, I think. So that's a part of the equation as well. But I think definitely, yeah, seeing people go on to do what they want to do, and I think just the positivity in that room, I think is great.
It's nice
Yeah.
what you said about community because often writers are quite isolated, aren't they? And it is, I think we do all crave that community. And
Yeah,
that,
absolutely. And I think for me, I find when when I started kind of getting more heavily involved in horror, like it was immediately apparent like there was a real community of people who were wanting to support each other, let alone what I was trying to come in and do. Our first event I ever tried to run, well, I did run. I was when I was starting out, I emailed John Gerald, quite a well-known SF fantasy agent, said, "Oh, would you like to come and sort of do a stint at this event?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'll put you in touch with this person," and that person put me in touch with another person. And there was real just immediately to me there was this sense of there's a group of people who are again they care about what they write, they care about the genre, and they I think that's one thing I love is very much it's not I have to be promoting what I'm doing all the time. It's all about my success. It's very much kind of well if there was the term is the rising tide floats all ships. Is that like if and I think like horror he's doing great at the minute. It's so exciting to see where horror is, like on in cinema. The horror film has been a massive year in 2024 and looking to be as big again in 2025. Horror book sales are going up as well. So there's definitely this sense of if the genre is doing well, then everyone within that is going to sort of gain from that. And I think that's definitely the attitude. The number of times, people come to me and ask things and I'll help out if I can. Equally, I'll go to someone else and so there's definitely a sense of people want to support one another. I think you probably will find that in any genre. I don't want to say that's just horror. That's my guys and my crew, my community. But you will find that everywhere. I think sort of romance, historical, crime. It's all out there to tap into. I think whether that's online, whether that's in person, those communities are definitely out there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really nice to hear kind of like how passionate you are. It's very clear when you're talking how passionate you are about what it is that you do. So it's really refreshing. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Yeah, I mean this is a classic question. I mean I ask this at interviews a lot. If I'm interviewing a writer, another writer, I'll ask this question. And so like you get such a mixed responses. I think I used the term imposter syndrome a little bit earlier on. I think that is one of the things I definitely would encourage writers to keep in mind, be aware of, and really actively try and sort of fight against. I think we are, as writers, very hard on ourselves. We are our own worst critics. I lose track of the times if someone has sent me, "Oh, here's a story. I don't think it's great. Could you tell me how to fix it?" And I'm sort of, maybe this paragraph could do with a tweak, but actually, I think this is really good. And we have this kind of almost like unproportionately negative view of our own writing. And then you read someone else's writing, you think, wow, that's amazing. That's so good. But they're probably thinking the same thing. They're probably thinking that exact same things. They're suffering the same imposter syndrome. They're not sure about what they're writing. So I think that's something I would just say, don't let that critic get the better of you. Just sit and write the story. I think that's to me is always what it's all about. I mean, if that's free writing, if that's, using different prompts, whatever it is, just keep getting words onto the page. If you need a famous example, this is into horror kind of legend, is that Stephen King tried to throw away the manuscript to Carrie, which launched not only Stephen King's career, probably the big boom in horror in the 70s and 80s. And his wife sort of rescued it and said, like, no, you should keep writing this. This is good. So there's that. If Stephen King can suffer imposter syndrome, then you're in good company if you look at it that way. I think the other thing as well is just to enjoy it. And I suppose that's the other thing. I think maybe we talk a lot about, publishing and goals and short story publication and novels. And, I think also just any writer will tell you like the reason they're in it is because they love writing, like first and foremost, like almost like the novels and the acclaim and the space on the bookshelves and the payments is almost like a secondary to just I just love writing. It's just you wouldn't break into it. If you didn't love it in the first place. So just never to lose that love and just think if I'm enjoying my writing, that's the first kind of measure of success. Because I think if you're enjoying it, then hopefully the reader will enjoy it as well. I think that's always a good sign.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And are there any common stumbling blocks for writers that are attempting to write in the horror or sort of science fiction genres?
Yeah, really good question. Really good question. I think if you come into it new, and I think this is always there's two things. I mean, I always say just to read in the genre. I think that like anything, there was a statistic in the US Census years back, and I can't remember what year it was, but that 1 in 10 people writing poetry were actually reading poetry, and I think how can you write poetry without reading it? It absolutely, it's like I'm gonna cook everyone a steak dinner, but I've never. I've never eaten steak. It's such a strange thing to do. So I think definitely reading in the field sort of before you start. And I think the reason what I'm leading to there, I think is understanding the genre in a deeper way. And I think we all probably have it for genres we're not involved in, is we have these like preconceptions, we have these fixed ideas of this is what a crime story is, this is what a romance story is, this is what a horror story is, whatever it might be. Every kind of genre, you have this like surface level kind of looking from the outside in. This is what I expect. I think it's when you get into the genre, you suddenly realize, actually, as I say, for horror, like this is a really broad church. This is not just, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and it's that's part of it, but is by no stretch the whole thing. And I think probably the trap I think a lot of people starting out fall into is feeling like they almost have to follow the format, follow the blueprint. And I think, there's so much great writing out there that sort of takes those things that are the blueprints and sort of throws them out the windows. I think it's not feeling limited to what's come before. I think it's reading what's come before, understanding what's come before, but also being aware, genres move by changing. Genres move by updating. Genres move by going in new directions. I think fantasy is kind of a really sort of fascinating place right now because we're reading now those kind of big epic quest kind of Tolkien-esque kind of fantasies are still out there. We've had a big wave of kind of grimdark fantasy. We have romantasy, which is the big thing of the moment. So the genre is changing and the genre is kind of is adapting. I think that's what every genre does, and that's by virtue of people experimenting, people trying new things. I would encourage you if you want to give it a go, be aware of those things, but don't feel like I have to, do my vampires in my fiction this certain way. I have to deliver my ghost story this sort of way. I think knowing what those conventions are is helpful, but I think being aware you can change them and adapt to them and go past them, I think is really important.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role as an events organizer and how you got involved in it? You did mention this a bit earlier.
Yeah, how I fell into that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I graduated creative writing here at the University of Derby, which is where I'm teaching now as well, which is on the same program, which is a slightly lovely full circle kind of moment to come to. But I came out of university with that creative writing degree with the sense of I don't quite what to do now. And I thought I want to stay involved and I want to kind of find something to do. And what was then Derby's Festival of Words was coming up on the horizon. So I emailed and I said, I'd love to volunteer. I'd love to just kind of help out. And volunteering for me was such a break into kind of understanding what an event was about and really led to sort of my employment in the field. The story of my first ever time volunteering is slightly strange one because I arrived at this poetry event and so I'm Alex, I'm here to volunteer. I'm a little bit sort of nervous. I'm sort of 19 years old, a little bit, wet behind the ears. And so I said, oh, great, great. Here's your steel drum. I'd like, okay, it's a standard issue. What are we doing here? And basically what we were doing was we were doing a poetry like procession. So someone said, right, here's the rhythm we're going to bash out as we go through town. We went to 3 or 4 different venues, a bunch of us with our steel drums. And I think you sort of, it just shows you to prepare for anything. And I think, it was so helpful to do I did a lot of years of volunteering, did a lot of events, and it was not all playing steel drums. Some of it was making cups of tea, moving chairs, things were a little bit less glamorous and exciting than that. But that really was what kind of led ultimately to me getting my first job in literature, and I had a role as coordinator for Nottingham Poetry Festival. While I was doing that, I got offered a role at Derby City Council as literature development officer, which was the role of the time. So it was, you wait ages for a job and then two come along at once. That was the sort of the feeling there, um, which I shouldn't complain about, but it was great. And I started there, yeah, just from there. The part of the role was events. Part of the role was literature events in and around Derby. I did my first kind of science fiction fantasy convention under those auspices with that hat on. Um, and it's all gone from there. And I think, volunteering for me was so valuable. And the thing I would advocate for anyone is like, if you want to do events and get involved in events, I think just start with volunteering, just get along to something. Every town, city, I think these days seems to have a literature festival of some stripe, or there'll be one near you somewhere. Get in touch. I'm sure many will be grateful to hear from you and grateful for the extra pairs of hands because again, we always need, and I've done it and I've had people do it for me. You need people to get the venue ready and prepare and greet everyone coming in and sell books and yeah, it's not always glamorous, but it puts you on the radar. You're meeting people who are doing those events locally. You're meeting writers, and you're learning every single event I was doing. I'm just clocking things, saying, okay, that's interesting. So that happens like half an hour before we start, or we do this then. And all the time, I was just kind of gathering this kind of intel of how an event runs, I suppose. Um, yeah, and everything has really gone from there. I've run, I mean, everything from sort of relatively small kind of 5, 10 people workshops to events of sort of hundreds and hundreds of people attending online events now these days, of course, which is a slightly different entity, but has a lot of the same steps and a lot of the same kind of things involved. I think that's the other thing I always say if anyone's interested in events. I think what I'd always say is start with something small because everything is scalable. I think this to me is what I think is every single event you do if it's 10 people, great, you've done a really good kind of event on that scale. If you're doing an event for 100 people, you need more time, you need more marketing, you need more promotion, you need more space. So it's kind of depending what the event is, you just kind of scale it. So I need more time, I need more lead in, I need more marketing, I need more authors. So the skill set, and I think the steps, the step by step does not change, but I think just the scale of it and the time scale in particular does change. But yeah, for me, it's always something I've loved doing. The thing I love the most is for events in particular, is kind of it really doesn't have a life until the day. And I think that's what's exciting as an events organizer. You spend like months and months and months, sometimes like more than a year, putting an event together. And it's all spreadsheets and emails and files, and it just has no existence like beyond your computer almost, your little internet world. And then you get there on the day and you think, wow, there's like a bunch of people here, and this author's here, and that author's here, and everyone's enjoyed themselves. And you probably, if you watch me carefully, you probably catch me at some point just kind of sitting in a corner going, oh, yeah, that's a real thing. I'm gonna think that's sort of like a sort of dawning realization that this thing's actually occurring around you. And that's to me is what's really special is that kind of culmination of all the work you've put in and seeing people really engage with it is the exciting bit.
Great. And you did Spring Haunts in
Mm.
association with Writing Magazine, and that's returning to York for its second
Yeah,
year.
absolutely. Yeah, really look forward to it. Really look forward to it. Yeah, so we had our event last year, which took place in York, a very haunted city, of course. It feels like a suitable place. Fantastic. So I've not been a lot before, so it's really nice just to go and take a look around York and experience it a bit more. So we're back in this year on the 29th and 30th of March. We're going to have 2 days of Gothic horror, ghost story workshops and interviews as well. I'm running a few sessions myself. We've got a host of authors from around the local area. So Yvonne Battle Felton, Simon Clark, We've got our interview with Alison Littlewood and Amanda Mason, did a great workshop for us last year as well. Also very excited to have a Saturday evening event as well. We've got Andrew Michael Hurley's joining us, who is, to anyone who loves folk horror, surely is a familiar name. His book Starvacre was just made into a movie starring Matt Smith fairly recently, which you'll find on your Prime Video somewhere. Other video services are available. You will find it out there if you go looking. He's brilliant. He's really one of the big names in that kind of folk horror realm. As we speak, we're going to have some book sales, getting loads of opportunity for feedback and discussion. It was such a blast last year. Really cool crowd of people came down. Everyone seems to get a lot out of the workshop sessions. As much as I love online, I do think there's something really great about being able to sit face to face with people, and then I think you really get, you get a lot out of that social experience as well. So yeah, really tremendous fun last year. Can't wait to get stuck in. Again, we're at York Explore, York Library, which is a lovely venue. Really impressed with it when I went for a look around. So ideally placed for the train station as well. I left the train station. I was like, that's really close by. Hello, kind of that was nice as well. So if you're traveling in, it's a breeze to get to. Yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah, I think it's something I loved doing last year, and sure it'll be just as good this time again. Plotting my sessions out, I'm doing a slot on creepypasta, which is one of my favorite sort of patches of horror, which might not mean anything to many listeners, but you'll find out more when you come to join us. Also, I'm doing my Sunday Speedy Spooktacular, which is kind of my efforts each time I run it to break the record for most story ideas developed in an hour. So we'll see how the group gets on with that. But I think the record so far is about 7. So pens at the ready, writing as fast as we can. See how we can get on with that. So yeah, it should be really fun.
Yeah, we're all really excited about it. And you can buy tickets for that on Eventbrite. So if anybody listening is interested, either head to our website or yeah, you can buy them direct from Eventbrite. Also, second event
Yeah.
that you guys are doing that you're doing with us this year is the Strangers Folk event in April.
Mm.
Just tell us a little bit more about that one as well, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned folk horror not 2 minutes ago. Again, definitely a patch that I'm really interested in, and I think a genre, subgenres going through a real kind of revival. There's so much great like folk horror out there. You've got authors like Andrew Stessay, Adam Neville, Lucy McKnight Hardy. There's some real like great authors working in that folk horror field. I'm sure I've omitted loads, but I don't have, an hour to go through them all. But we said a lot of great folk horror films as well, things like Midsummer, things like The Witch, a lot of kind of vibrant kind of interest in folk horror. And if you like me sort of grew up or were catching on to a little bit later with things like The Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw, those are the kind of original folk horror stories. So Strangers Folk is online. That's running on the 12th of April. We've got 4 folk horror authors joining us to run workshops throughout that event. So I've got Melanie Golding, who's a best-selling author of kind of the sort of folk horror and crime, really fascinating stories. So I look forward to that one. Kerry Hadley Price is doing an interview with us. Her books are really interesting look at location. We're going to talk about the idea of psychogeography, which again may not mean anything to everybody, but we will find out more and we'll tell you more about what that means. Very useful idea for folk horror. Adam S. Leslie joining us, who's just won the Nero Book Award 2024 for Lost in the Garden. So great to have him along. And wrapping up with Eden Royce, who's joining us, who's done a lot of folk horror and YA and children's books as well. So looking at some of those elements as well. She'll be looking at ritual. So yeah, very exciting day ahead of us. And you can join us from the comfort of your own home. You don't even have to go anywhere for that one. We had a great time with it last year. Really, really good response. And yeah, folk horror just seems to be the in thing. I mentioned I'm watching a lot of films lately. Most of those are folk horror for another folk horror film festival. So it's very cool things to get to do as well. But there's never any shortage because it's just so in as we speak. Long may it last.
Yeah, that also sounds like it's going to be another great event. You're definitely keeping yourself busy, aren't you?
I do try. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys, work with Writer Magazine, work with Writers Online. There's so much great stuff going on. That's been. I was sort of totting up how long the articles have been running. I think it's gone 10 years. So it's always been a pleasure to work with you guys over there.
Oh, that's amazing. And are you working on any of your own sort of writing projects at the moment?
Yeah. I don't always get as much time to write as I would like. I think that's the downside of having so many exciting projects on the go. I'm also I don't know. I think I freelance because I just love what I do, and sometimes there are maybe times when I look back and think maybe I should have said no to that, but it was really exciting, and I just said yes, kind of in a moment of I don't know, just the pure excitement and giddy joy. Yes, that sounds great. What I'm writing at the minute is an urban folk horror story. So basically, there's an anthology forthcoming which is on that topic of, and I think when we say folk horror, we think of The Wicker Man, we think of Midsummer, we think of islands and fields and rolling hills and forests, and we think of the rural environment. So this anthology is a bit of a kind of answer to that in terms of urban folk horror. So the story I'm writing as I speak is set in a very tiny Japanese apartment. If you look on YouTube, there's a running thread of places in Japan that are like remarkably tiny little apartments, and this one in particular really caught my eye as a sort of fascinating sort of urban space. And basically, the kind of core concept is this building has kind of been eating itself because of a certain kind of folk horror element. So it was a bigger building, but it has kind of shrunk. But yeah, it's I mean, if you're claustrophobic, do not go and check out these videos on YouTube whatsoever because they are your worst nightmare. But it's a very cultural thing that a lot of the apartments in that neck of the woods seem to just be very tiny. People don't have a lot of possessions. A lot of people will kind of eat out rather than cooking, and so it just seems to be a cultural thing that these kind of like apartments that are smaller than your front room are quite common and quite well used. So yeah, really interesting. But that's
Mm.
the origin of that one came from those explorations of those apartments in particular.
Yeah, it sounds like a really fascinating kind of start for a book that.
Yeah. I'll say it's a short story for now. I may see where it progresses to, but I've always been interested in the idea of kind of like again the qualities of folk horror can again like the rural seems to be the natural, but there's a sort of Adam Scavell talks about it in his book, the idea of like a chain of events that kind of symbolize folk horror. And I'd point to like Candyman, if anyone's ever seen Candyman or read um, the novella that it's based on. That's a really great example of kind of urban folk horror. It has those qualities of folklore and monsters and rituals, but it's in this kind of very urban environment. So I think there's nice kind of precedent for it as an area. So yeah, it's something I've definitely had an interest in. So this anthology spoke to me in particular.
I can imagine. And do you have, dare I say it, a date that you're working towards to get that finished, or is it just
I'm
imminent?
hoping to have it done by the end of the month. Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan. It's a short story, so it's little bit by little bit. So I'm sort of trying to do sort of at least a few hundred words a day. If I have a novel on the go, I'm normally a bit more like intense, but short stories I can sort of break down into slightly sort of more digestible chunks. But obviously I have the deadline for it in mind, so it's not just my deadline. There is an official deadline that I have to keep in my head too.
Oh, amazing. Well, we'll look forward to seeing that one then when
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
it.
If they hope they want it. That's the biggest thing. When you're submitted to an anthology, hopefully they'll want to take it.
You find it's quite hard to come out of that headspace, especially if you're writing about sort of eerie, claustrophobic things. I'm a bit of a wimp, so I think I'd find it quite hard to come back into the real world when I'd.
Yeah, I suppose yeah, and I think it's I think in a way like all writing is you are entering another world in some ways, even if it is quite grounded. You're inhabiting another character, or you're in a space that kind of isn't that isn't your own. That's one of the things I love. I love, and it feels quite sort of separate. So it is a story like this is like it's not a part of the world that I've been to. It's not something I've ever sort of lived in. So you are really that trying to enter someone else's shoes in a way that I think is really sort of fascinating. So you can sort of almost, I feel like I can sort of close that box and kind of put that character away and kind of sort of come back to reality, I suppose, fairly fairly easily. But yeah, I think when you are particularly like neck deep in a novel, you can feel like you are like living and breathing it, and you're really immersed um, in that world and in that setting. And yeah, sometimes those things can be, especially at a long writing session, it can be quite hard to sort of come out of. You know, I've had days on novels where I've written sort of 5, 10,000 words a day, and you turn the computer off and you sort of takes a minute to reorient yourself.
What was the title of the book?
The book is called Blood in the Bricks. Again, it's not as I say I have to write it and send it, and
Yeah.
obviously I'm hoping for the best, as many people will be. Again, if anyone's ever written short stories for anthologies, you'll know you write it, you do your very best, you send it. Not everything goes in as you would like, which is just one of those things. Again, after this, it'll probably be on to the next cool anthology that I find that looks really interesting and really catches my eye. So. Yeah, it's a kind of a different animal to the kind of agent kind of publisher novel world. You are sort of looking for books you think I'd like to be a part of that, and then you write the story accordingly. So that's kind of where I am with this one.
We'll keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be great when it comes out, and hopefully, again, I'd love to be in it. If I'm not in it, I'll still buy a copy because I think it's just going to be a great read regardless.
Well, talking of great reads, we always like to end by asking for a book recommendation. Do you have one for us?
Yeah, I do. Can I have two? Am I allowed to? Because there's
Oh.
one. Well, say I mentioned it very briefly earlier. Starve by Andrew Michael Hurley. Absolutely one of my favorite folk horror books of all time. Again, Andrew's really. Again, I've interviewed Andrew before. He's coming to the Spring Haunts. Really lovely chap. Really interesting guy. And it's such a fascinating read because it's so like a lot of folk horror, very slow burn, and you can like the weirdness almost like sneaks up on you without you realizing, and suddenly you think I'm in a world of weird all of a sudden. I don't know where that came from. It's so well done. It's such a clever book. And I will say the film was good as well. I kind of have had a few films where I thought that was quite a disappointing adaptation. Like this was not. I think kept a lot of the spirit and the feel. Did make a few changes as films can tend to, but I think it's pretty faithful in a lot of respects to the book. The other one I recently read, which I absolutely loved, is a book by Cassandra Core called The Salt Grows Heavy, which is a sort of dark gothic fairy tale, I suppose. So it is about a sort of mermaid who gets captured by a princess, very like dark fantasy. But I mean, the writing style was so gorgeous and so poetic. And like the number of times I like read a paragraph and just stopped and went back and read it again. I just kind of like I wanted to kind of take my time over it more. Like it wasn't like I was kind of I wasn't sort of devouring. I was kind of relishing. Kind of I want to taste every flavor in this book. It was amazing. So I'd really point to that one as well. That's fantastic. It's quite a short read, but it really was so striking.
I love when you find a book like that where you're just happy to take your time reading every single
Oh
line.
yeah, yeah. And I know I'll read it again. I know I'll come up. So it's on my shelf for the minute, but I know that's going to get a reread at some point 'cause it was just gorgeous. Yeah, and it's so hard to do because you can overdo that kind of thing. I say, don't like you can overdo the poetic and the descriptive, but I think it was such a good balance, and it was so imaginative and sort of dark and yeah, really just wonderfully done.
Well, thank you very much for those. And thank you for talking to us today. It's been a real pleasure.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, we're always happy to talk books. Never a hard sell. I really enjoyed it.
And could you just
Yeah.
remind us of the dates for Strangers Folk and Spring Haunts?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, so Spring Haunts is happening at York Explore, York Library. That is the 29th and the 30th of March. Strangers Folk is running online, so you can join us from anywhere. That is going to be on the 12th of April. And yeah, look forward to those two events. And we will have more in the future, which I cannot say anything about just yet, but plans are afoot. Your listeners may rest assured.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into the Write Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Write Club. Until next time, happy writing!